works. Okay. So to find a public law number, just to review, and actually we would go, if we have the name of an act, like we do for ERISA, we would go to the popular name tool. Again, these links in the class web links. And once in the popular name tool, actually what I would do is, I'm here in E, so you can see I've started typing employee. And here I would learn Public Law 93-406. And I could find the statutes. And here this brings me again to the table. So let's take a closer look at the public law in the statutes at large. And that's what this other handout is for. And this is why I think of this class as up close and personal. I've decided to go with really low-tech technology, aka paper, because honestly I've found that that document camera doesn't work particularly easily or well for me. So let's see how we like the low technology with the good old-fashioned paper. And by that I mean what I've done is I've just copied the relevant pages for you so you can see them here, and I've added a little bit of notation hopefully to help you out. So looking here, of course, we found out volume 88 is our statutes at large volume, and we would turn to page 829 in the book, which is what you will see on page 2. Now, in terms of up close and personal, a couple of things I want to point out that we haven't talked about already is looking at the table of contents, which is what you'll see, of course, in the beginning. We see the table of contents, we see short title, and then we see Title I, Protection of Employee Benefit Rights. And you can see my handy-dandy arrow there. Basically, that's telling us here's the subject area of the whole bunch of sections following it. Not probably about it, I'm sure you could have figured that out all on your own. However, keep in mind that word title, because what happens is that word title is used in a couple of different contexts, and unless you understand which context you are in, you will get confused. So we have Title I, in other words, subject area number 1, protection of employee benefit rights. Turning to page 3 of the handout, the table of contents continues. We see the different sections within employee benefit rights, and of course our favorite section, section 514, effect on other laws. Okay, anybody remember effect on other laws, where we found that in the U.S. Code from last time? Okay, if you don't, we'll get there. Okay, so let's continue on. So Title I was protection of employee rights. We see here on page 3, Title II, or subject area number 2, is amendments to the Internal Revenue Code relating to retirement plans. So, Internal Revenue Code. Justin, you and I were chatting briefly before class. Do you remember what we said, what title that was in the U.S. Code? 26. So that's in Title 26 of the U.S. Code. And again, we talked a little bit about this last time. I'll be reviewing it at length again today. And so under Title II, or subject area number 2, we see the different sections having to do with the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, all pretty straightforward, I hope. Let's turn to page 4. So after the whole table of contents, we finally begin with the text of the Act, of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And we see, so Section 1 was just the name of the Act. Section 2 here is Findings and Declaration of Policy. That particular section you will see sometimes in acts, in other words, why Congress saying, or the state legislature saying, why did we enact this statute? And that will be a good source later on for legislative history, which we'll talk about later. But you won't necessarily see that in every piece of legislation. But we do here in ERISA, so our Section 2 of ERISA, Public Act 93-406, it tells us here in the statutes at large, which we saw last time, that, oh look, this is in Title 29 of the U.S. Code, Section 101. So again, what I had hoped last time, the one thing you would walk away with, the one part of the class you would understand, is that public laws with all those sections get translated, transferred into the U.S. Code. And remember, the fancy word for that is codified, put in subject arrangement. So it goes from a chronological ordering in the statutes at large, where you just have one public law on one subject after another, organized totally just by the date that they were passed. And then they get pulled out by subject, so all the labor, all the employee or labor sections will wind up in Title 29, and tax sections will wind up in 26, and there are a whole bunch of others we'll look at in a little while. So let's turn to page 5, and Section 3 of ERISA, Public Law 93-406, and I'm repeating that for a reason. So Section 3 is the definitions section, and one thing we see again is that Section 3 winds up going in Title 29 U.S.C. Section 1002, as opposed to 1001, which was the findings and declaration of policy. And the other thing I mentioned here on the handout, always good to check for a definitions section. In federal state statutes, you won't always find one, and they might not always be relevant to whatever your issue is, but well worth the 5 minutes of just looking up and down the table of contents or scrolling or flipping pages, whatever format you're in, and see, does the legislature define the terms within this statute section for me so I know exactly what it is they mean by a particular word? Because frequently, as I'm sure you've read cases where a controversy revolves around what a particular term means, right? Am I right that you've all read a case or two like that? Okay, good. Hate to make assumptions and then not come out to be correct. So if the legislature has defined that, you need to know about that before you go and try to interpret what the statute means with respect to your client. So look for that definition section, and here it turns out ERISA provides one for us. Okay, so let's continue on with our up-close and personal look at Public Law 93-406 on page 6 of the handout. Excuse me, at last we see our favorite Section 514, Effect on Other Laws. And again, that tells us that was transferred over to Title 29, U.S. Code 1144. So again, notice the numbering system. There's no rhyme or reason to how the number of the public law gets transferred into the U.S. Code. So you can't assume, oh, Section 514 in the public law is Section 514 in the U.S. Code. Probably hardly ever. Total coincidence if it works out that way. Okay, turning to page 7, we see the beginning of Title 2, or as I'm calling it, subject area number 2. And again, that's the Internal Revenue Code. And sure enough, as Justin predicted, the Internal Revenue Code winds up in Title 26 of the U.S. Code. And this particular Section 1011 of our Public Law 93-406, otherwise known as ERISA, that winds up in Section 410 of Title 26 of the U.S. Code. Everybody following where I'm getting all those numbers from? Okay. You will see why, I hope soon. This is so important. Okay. So what I'm going to show you now is one reason why I am elaborating on that translation between the public law and the code so much. And one of those reasons, here what I have pulled up on Lexis is an article from the New York Times, as you can see, from August 2014, so not too long ago. And I'll scroll down, and it's talking about the Voting Rights Act, and it's talking Judge backs new limits on North Carolina voting and the application of state requirements on people registering to vote and how that comports with the Voting Rights Act. And so here, sure enough, the New York Times talks about North Carolina legislators who voted for the law have been emboldened by a 2013 Supreme Court ruling that effectively gutted, notice here, Section 5 of the Federal Voting Rights Act. Anybody know when the Voting Rights Act was passed?
1964.
64. 60 sounds, I'll take your words. I know it's in the early-ish 60s. So we can agree on that, and you may be quite right at 64. Okay, so we're talking about something that was passed in 64, yet the New York Times is talking about Section 5 of this act that was passed in 64. Do we think it's still the same it was in 1964? Probably. I see a couple of no's. Probably not for sure. So one of the reasons I make such a big deal, if you want to see what Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1964 is today, which is what the Supreme Court considered in 2013 and what the North Carolina legislature may or may not be looking at in August of 2014, where would you want to look? Do you want to look at the Voting Rights Act as it was passed in 64? What resource tells us what laws are as they are currently in force? U.S. Code. But how do we translate it?
That other website that you had up?
That other website that I have. Fair enough. So what I'm going to do is go to that other website I had up, which is the Popular Name Tool. And I'm going to look up what? Voting Rights Act. I'm going to hope it's working on it. Computer's been a little slow today, so bear with me if you will. Oh dear. It's not even going to let me scroll. One problem with live demonstrations is when the computer decides to not work. All right, let's see if we can talk about something else whilst we do that. Okay, why don't we, while that's loading, if you can, oh, here we go. So rather than scroll, I'm just going to do a Control F and look for voting. Oh, look at that. It went back up to A. I don't know if I did that or it did that. All right, so I'm going to scroll because I'm just not going to fight with it. Voting. That's it. Okay, so Voting Rights Act, 1965. We were close. And so public law, and it's telling us it starts here in Title 52 of the U.S. Code. Anybody remember what et sec means?
All the other statutes in that section, like that follow.
And following. Yeah, exactly. You had the right idea. So if we click on the public, this will bring us actually to the U.S. Code, but if we click on the public law, that's where we get that nice translation table. So Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is where in the U.S. Code? Of? I'm sorry? Title 52. Okay, I'm going to ask everybody to do this little exercise in a workshop later, which I'm hoping we'll have time for, planning we'll have time for, so I wanted to walk you through it. So we've been using that word title, Title 52, Title 1 of ERISA. Let's take a quick look at page 3 simultaneously, so you'll sort of want to put your finger in there. Page 3, so remember we looked at Title 2, actually pages 2 and 3, so Title 1 was Employee Benefits Right, page 3 was Amendments to the Internal Revenue Code, and then at the same time, to flip ahead to page 13. And actually, I might even save you the bother if I can get the computer to work. That should be the one. So actually, you don't even have to go to page 13 because I have it up here on the screen, which is more up to date anyway. So let's just take a look at pages 2 and 3 and then up on the screen. 2 and 3, we're looking at Title I of ERISA and Title II of ERISA. On the screen, we're looking at the titles of the U.S. Code. And this is what I mean about the word title being used in a couple of different contexts that could confuse people. You could be talking about the title of a public law, of an act, or you could be talking about the title of the U.S. Code. And you just have to be thinking about what the context is in order to figure out. So when we hear Title 52 or Title 20 of the U.S. Code, or Title 29 or Title 26, those are the titles here that we see starting Title I, General Provisions. We see Title 29, Labor, 26, Internal Revenue Code, although apparently these days there are 54 titles of the U.S. Code, down to National Park Service and related programs. And there are all sorts of titles in between covering lots of different areas of the law where statutes have been passed. One of my favorite, I call it the holiday title, Title 36, Patriotic and National Observances, Ceremonies and Organizations. It's a whole title about holidays and other things. Anyway, so again, just be aware when you see that word title, think to yourself, okay, am I talking about the U.S. Code or am I talking about a subject area of a particular act? And as long as you're thinking about it, I think you won't get confused. Make sense? Questions? Okay. So back here in our handout, we were on page 7. Let's just take a really quick look at the next couple of pages, 8 through 12, and they are USCAN. Remember, United States Code, Congressional Administrative News, and I will never ask you to say that whole long name, and hopefully I won't say it again either. But USCAN, remember, was the unofficial source for our public laws, not given volume numbers, so you basically find it by year and then the public law number. So again, where we find the public laws, the federal session laws, remember session law, that generic term. And here's what U.S. Code, USCAN, looks like up close and personal. So again, there's that title page. Again, you can see the spine that we looked at last time. No volume number, you just find the year, and then you find your public law by number in the volume. And turning to page 9, it pretty much looks the same other than not having the citation information that the statutes at large has because it's a different set. So we see the table of contents, we see our Title I that we were just talking about. Turning to pages 10, we see the rest of the table of contents. We see our section 514, we see Title II, the subject area for the Internal Revenue Code. Turning to page 11, we see the actual text of the Act, so Section 2, that findings and declaration of policy, exact same text that we saw in statutes at large. And page 12, again, our Section 514. And again, all the text is the same. USCAN exists because West Publishing saw a niche in the market that, hey, we could publish these public laws a whole lot quicker. So USCAN is far more up to date in the books than statutes at large, and even still in the various sources online. And we can do some additional features with respect to legislative history, which we'll talk about when we talk about legislative history. So that's why USCAN exists. But again, the text of the actual public laws, totally the same. And the reason I talk about USCAN is that you will see references to it. You'll see it on Westlaw. You will see it cited in law review articles, possibly in cases. So you should know what USCAN is. Okay, so continuing on our handout, we see page 13 we really looked at already. Those are the titles of the U.S. Code. So let's at long last move on to the next episode in our federal statutes drama. And that, of course, is the codes and why what are the codes and why annotated codes in particular are going to be some of your best research friends. So we started talking about the U.S. Code again for the 18,000th time. Hopefully you're bored to tears by now. The public law sections get transferred, codified into subject-arranged titles, U.S. Code titles, 29 labor, 26 tax, whatever the number was for holidays, I forget already.
36.
36, thank you. I'm going to remember that. And here's what the U.S., since I like show and tell, here's what the U.S. Code looks like in real life. Probably you will never use the U.S. Code. It is not an annotated code. It is unlikely to be one of your friends. Why, you might ask, I hope? Couple of answers. I'll pass this around so you can see it. One reason is how it's updated. Remember, we have to update, and update. And in print and online, because it's the same thing, the way the U.S. Code updated makes no sense. It makes no sense, and it also is incredibly slow. Again, the government, it's the official publication, the government publishes it. So the most recent United States code that exists anywhere, and I will prove that to you online in just a sec, is from 2013. Now, the way it's updated, and why I say it makes no sense, is the U.S. Code is published, its official edition is published every 6 years. What is floating around now is the 2012 edition, and you can see on page 14, I have given you the title page of the volume that's floating around, and it says 2012 edition. So the last official edition was obviously 2006, and the next official edition will obviously be 2018. I know we can all add and subtract by 6. What happens in the interim 6 years, you might wonder, I hope? The U.S. Code publishes supplements. So here is supplement number 1 of the U.S. Code, and this is the most recent U.S. Code that exists anywhere in the planet. And if you turn to page 15, what you will see up close and personal is that supplement 1, the most recent that exists anywhere on the planet, is up to date through January 16, 2014. Now, you may or may not argue that Congress did a lot or not so much in the last year, but they did do something, right? You would kind of want to know that, because that might kind of affect your client if they changed the law in 2014. And if you look at supplement 1, whether in print or online, you will not find out. Now, I'm going to get on a soapbox, so forgive me for hopefully like 90 seconds. It beats the daylights out of me why you, and I don't mean you personally, why your journals insist on citing to the U.S. Code. Actually, I do know why. It's because the Blue Book does. It doesn't make, why the Blue Book does beats the daylights out of me. Because it's not what the law is at this given time, or even probably when your author wrote the article. But because the Blue Book says it, everybody insists on citing to the U.S. Code, so the poor source gatherers don't understand the U.S. Code, because who remembers 6 years and supplements and all that. Looking for these supplements, they pull the last one out, which is still not the most up-to-date, as I've now shown you. And it's just, again, it makes no sense to me. So, okay, I'm off that soapbox. All you journal people can rest assured I won't pick on you anymore. And there's the supplement going around, and while that goes around, I will find the GPO. GPO stands for Government Printing Office. Actually, now they call themselves Government Publishing Office. I have to start using the new name. And here is the United States Code. And if you look at choose year, you see 2013 is already up. If I click the drop down and try to be a little more patient, come on, you will see 2013 is the most recent here online as well. So at least from the government itself, this is the most recent version of the United States Code you can get. So this is why the U.S. Code, I think, will probably not be your research friend. And in fact, I don't plan on looking at it moving forward. What I do want to look at is, as I keep on saying, are the annotated codes. The unofficial codes published by these commercial publishers that we know well, West and Lexis, because they add features. Basically, that's how they make money. They take the government publication and then they add features to it, like West did with UScan, which you'll see in a little while when we talk about legislative history. Here, we will see the best example, in my opinion, looking at the U.S. Code Annotated. U.S. Code Annotated is published by West. U.S. Code Service is published by Lexis. So obviously we'll find the USCA on Westlaw, USCS on Lexis, and we actually find the U.S. Code on Bloomberg, but with the updates incorporated. I'm going to focus on the U.S. Code Annotated only because it's most of the time what you will see if you see an annotated code in print. Very few firms, even back in the old days, had the U.S. Code Service, and these days I don't know if anybody does anymore. I kind of wonder why they publish it. But it does exist, and we'll see it on Lexis. So here's what it looks like, again, show and tell. Here's what it looks like in the good old-fashioned print. And what I'm also going to do is we're going to look fairly carefully at the U.S. Code Annotated in print. And the reason for that is I am still not sure whether or not you, those of you who are graduating this year, as well as those of you graduating next year, will encounter work situations where you're expected to use print statutes. It still may be the case, and I would feel remiss if I haven't shown you this, but I sort of suspect in a few years from now I will give up teaching the print entirely because you all will have no longer encounter it. But there are still firms who at least get one version of a print code, maybe not the U.S. Code Annotated, maybe their state code. So we'll be looking at McKinney's in print next time. But I am going to show you how to negotiate your way around print codes. Maybe you'll use it, maybe you don't, but hopefully you now at least appreciate it, why we're doing the old-fashioned print. But what I will also do is show you Westlaw at the same time so you can compare and contrast. And then afterwards we'll walk through Lexis and Bloomberg. So you'll see the annotated codes in print and you'll see them online as well. Okay, so let's take a look at how you would find statutes. We've already talked about how you'd find a statute to have the popular name, right? You would look at that website that we just looked at, the popular name table. You can use the class web links. You can just Google popular name table and you would find it pretty easily. So that's how you'd find a federal popular name. We'll talk about state codes next time. Another way you can look online. So if we were interested in, and it depends on the popular name, what you will see on Westlaw, Lexis, and Bloomberg. So if we typed in ERISA, because it's fairly frequently searched, I'm guessing Westlaw, ERISA, I know that's pension benefits. So Westlaw directs us directly to the statute and court rules. Actually, just looking briefly here at Lexis, again, typing in ERISA, Lexis is guessing what we want, maybe not quite as direct, but if we go with what it does come closest to what we're interested in, and let's see what Lexis comes up with. And again, remember, it's not quite as direct, so we have to tell Lexis, yeah, I really want statutes and legislation. And then with Lexis, if we scroll down, actually, we see the U.S. Code as our second entry, but usually with Lexis, what you want to try to remember to do is, yeah, I really want the codes. I don't want legislative history or bill text. Unfortunately, Lexis lumps it all together under statutes, which is one of my personal criticisms of Lexis. And over here in Bloomberg, Bloomberg also tries to guess what we're after, and Bloomberg has this nice sort of section down here, popular name table lookup, where it recognizes ERISA. So again, it depends on your particular act whether the various services will recognize it and how they treat it, and then you just have to follow your nose accordingly. Okay, so that's how you'd find a statute if you had the popular name. More likely than not, most of the time, what you're going to be looking for is statutes by topic. And hopefully by now, I have convinced you that certainly with more complex issues or involved issues or issues that you really don't know where they fit in, Like for most of us with ERISA and preemption, we didn't even know those two words when we were talking about liability of our HMO. Hopefully I've convinced you all you really want to start in secondary sources. And then from secondary sources, you'll get the references that we saw to our 29 U.S. Code 1144, to ERISA, possibly to a couple of other sections as well. And then you can dive into the codes with those section numbers accordingly, which I'll show you in just a moment. However, you still may want to do a keyword search sometimes with basic issues. That could work okay, or you know that particular area of law, so you know what terms you want to be using. So let's take a look if we want to do that, and all I'm going here is to my history, so you don't have to watch me type. Come on, Westlaw. And using our term search before we learned about preemption, liability, HMO, denial of claim. And again, remember, I want to go to, I've already clicked on statutes, but if you hadn't, obviously you want to click on statutes. And of course, what Westlaw is giving us is federal and state, so for the moment I might want to limit to federal, or I might want to limit to federal in New York. And Westlaw does a pretty good job with its natural language search, obviously pulling up the section that we know is relevant. And I know we didn't look very much in detail in the secondary sources, but some of the secondary sources we had encountered with regard to ERISA preemption also talked about 1132, civil enforcement. Sort of the, what if you do if you're preempted, then you want to sue in federal court because we can't sue in state court, and this actually, the secondary source would have told us this is one section that's relevant. Okay, so again, that's by topic on Westlaw, by topic on Lexis. I'm going to go back, which I didn't have to go back to the home page, but again, I'm just going to go into my history here with the same search. Actually, nice thing, actually I like this feature about Lexis where you can, it remembers your recent searches right on the front page there. Don't like it when it's slow. Arg. Okay, why Lexis chose dockets, I don't know, but let's click on more and go to statutes and legislation. And again, this is a feature of the new platforms of Lexis and Westlaw that you use the post-search filters to choose the type of document that you want. And again, as I mentioned, Lexis dumps bills and all sorts of legislative history material in their statutes category and post-search filters, so we want to narrow it one step further to codes. And again, now and if we narrow yet again, so actually we scroll down, our second hit here is that 1132 I mentioned, or we can narrow again to U.S. federal. But hopefully, again, you're all familiar with this. And let's go here to Bloomberg. And what I've done here, just to make things a little quicker, is I've done the search, and now remember in Bloomberg we don't have a natural language capability, so we have to use those terms and connectors. So I did a very simple search, liab, exclamation, /p within the same paragraph, HMO, and again you'd want to narrow. Now interestingly here, we would want to narrow, filter our searches, our search. What's interesting though, notice we do not get federal in our results. Why do you think that is? And this isn't a trick question, but it is a difficult one. And this goes to bibliographic awareness, that theme I mentioned in the beginning of the course. Bloomberg does not have an annotated code online. Bloomberg will give us case analyses, as we'll see a little later on, but Bloomberg, our search is not searching the annotations, it's just searching the text of the statute. So there are no federal sections, federal statutory sections, code sections I really should say. There are no federal code sections that use both of those terms. they're getting pulled up in Lexis and Westlaw because Lexis and Westlaw are searching all the other annotated code features that I haven't shown you yet, but I will, one of which is the notes of decisions. So again, it's good to be aware, Bloomberg is still developed. To me, the biggest weakness of Bloomberg as a competitor to Lexis and Westlaw is the lack of a fully functioning and featured annotated code. The lack of natural language bothers me a whole lot less, maybe because I'm just used to terms and connectors, but I think not having that annotated code is really, really a detriment because you lose out on these important research features, one of which is the ability to search across not just the very controlled vocabulary of code sections or statutory language. Okay, so as promised, let's dive into Westlaw and do a little compare and contrast with an annotated code, in this case the USCA. So obviously to pull up a section you already know, pretty straightforward. Okay, so here's our section online, and if you turn to page 17, what you see is the table of contents of the overall Employee Retirement Income Security Program. Once again, the table of contents, not only once again, most especially with regard to the code, the table of contents is hugely useful because you may get a reference to a statute section. It may not be the best one, it may not be the only one. So I will always look at the table of contents, whether in print, as you can see on page 17, or online, pretty straightforward in Westlaw, and the other services as well, as I'll show you up here. Just click on table of contents and I can see. And scroll up, and maybe or maybe not, I recognize 1132 is interesting, but I can look down and see whatever else might be of interest. Do I want to take a look and see what ERISA has to say about regulations? I know I'm going to have to check them eventually. We haven't talked about that yet, but we will. Anything else here that is of interest? Now, I'm not going to say every time you look at the table of contents you'll find something useful, but that will be one way you will see what else is out there that might be of interest. And you may also want to expand beyond the particular subsection, especially that Westlaw here provides. For instance, it's at Part 5 of Subtitle B of Subchapter 1 of ERISA. So we may want to see, fiduciary responsibility. Maybe I want to see if I can sue our HMO for violating their fiduciary responsibility. What does the statute have to say about that? If I want to see the overall table of contents for ERISA, then I can just go ahead and click on that, which is Chapter 18, which is actually what we're looking at in print on page 17. One thing I don't like about the Westlaw table of contents is it doesn't give you the section ranges, so I would have to guess where any particular section would be here. But it's just a function of clicking on the various subsections. Okay, so that's the table of contents. And again, on page 18, you see in print where our definite section of interest is and where the other section is as well. And turning to page 19 in print on the handout, you see the beginning of 1144. And what I've done on the top right is I circled that chapter 18. When I'm using the print, that's how I know where I need to flip back in the book to find the table of contents. So it is trickier in the books, for sure, using the table of contents, but don't let that deter you because, again, it can be really valuable. Okay, so at long last, we've been talking about this for how long? A month and a half? Section 1144, as it is currently in force, maybe. Other laws, and then we see Part A, supersedure, effective date. Again, notice we never see the word preemption. The word preemption, I don't believe, is in any of the text here. In fact, let's do a Control F because it would be fun. And other than the Westlaw note up here, let's even give it the benefit of the doubt and just say preempt. So here's a Westlaw note, so that's not the text of the section, and that's the only one. So I am right. Nowhere in the text of the section is the word preemption. So we needed to get that reference and that concept elsewhere. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important secondary sources are. But okay, so here's the text. The first area I want to take a look at is the end of the text. And why do I want to take a look at the end? Because this is where the credits are. If you turn to page 21, you'll see the equivalent in print. In print, notice you don't see the word credits. That's Westlaw's term. And what that is basically the history or the source. Where did this code section come from? Remember, all of our code sections got transferred over from public laws, right? So here, in this parenthetical in the print, the credits on Westlaw Online is where you find the public law number that affected your code section. So here, 1144, what we're interested in, at least online, the current version of our preemption section, it, as we now know, check this out, was originally enacted 93-406, section 514. We know that very well now, right? That sounds familiar. Hopefully you're bored with those numbers already. And what do you think the rest of these public laws are? Amendments, exactly. So 1144 got changed here in 1983 and again in 1984 and 1986. When was it most recently changed? Helena?
August 17, 2006.
By public law number?
109-280.
Excellent. Everybody see that? I'm going to highlight it for you down here. So you all see that. See, public law, it's the last one listed, is all Helena rightly surmised that the last one's going to be the most recent. And she found public law 109-280. In what subject area number? Remember, I call subject area is a different name for title. Great. And what's the number? 9. Roman 1x, Roman numeral 9. Okay. This is going to become incredibly critical to go through this analysis I just did when we talk about legislative history. But I wanted you to see it now when we're talking about the code to understand its context. Okay, so that's feature number 1 of the annotated code. Actually, technically, it's in the regular U.S. code too, not just the annotated. But you do want to know that. Okay, but now let's really look at the feature of the annotated code. So we got a reference to 1144 and preemption, but maybe as we do research we realize I don't really understand what on earth this section is talking about. I need more help. What the annotated code will do for us is provide context and analysis. And it even tells us here on Westlaw. I could look at law reviews. I could look at the ALR, encyclopedias, treatises, depending on how in-depth I want to go, what type of analysis. Do I want to read law professors' recommendations on what the law should be? Law reviews. Do I want to read treatises and practice aids, probably a bit more practitioner-oriented? Do I want to get some forms? Do I want a basic explanation in encyclopedias? Again, all those great features of the various secondary sources. Turning the page in print so you can see that. We see a whole lot of historical references on pages 22 and 23. I'll talk more about that when we talk about legislative history. For now, let's take a look at pages 23, where we start to see some law reviews. And again, this is just the print version of what we're looking at in Westlaw, should you have reason to use the print. And it goes on for a few pages in the print. So looking on page 25, as I was scanning down in the print, one caught my eye, which had I chosen context and analysis, and even if I just click on the tab, then I get all of the different choices, and then I can narrow it here on the left and gone to law reviews, I would have found this on Westlaw as well. And here's one: judicial review of denial of health care benefits under post-Firestone cases. So that's an ALR that I might want to, that might help me further understand ERISA. And again, the pages 26, 27, all of these secondary context and analysis, also known as secondary sources that we see on Westlaw. Okay, let's go to page 28 and back here up on Westlaw, probably the best annotated code feature. Forget probably. The best annotated code feature, if for no other reason. You're all law students, you've read cases, you know you have to research cases. Why reinvent the wheel? If you know you have a code section, go to the notes of decisions. And if you're not already familiar with what they are cases that interpret your code section. Sure, we can go online and create the most complex, impressive terms and connectors search ever. Why? Westlaw's done it. The annotated code, we'll see it on Lexis and actually Bloomberg too, they've done it for us already. Why do work that's already done? Now, because 1144, our ERISA preemption section has been litigated a great deal, we don't actually see the list initially on Westlaw. What we see are two subheadings. We see generally and state regulation or control. I actually don't love that particular feature. Let's see if that list view does us any good. So that list view does do us. It gives us a list, depending on what you prefer. Or there's the hierarchical view. Actually, let's go back to the list. Oh, wait, back to the hierarchical view. Notice here there's a search mechanism for notes and decisions. What you are searching, just be aware, I'm going to click on this hierarchical view. I like a little bit better because it gives me these different topics here on the side. I mean, there are 1,900 plus notes of decisions. Obviously, I'm really not excited to read 1,900 descriptions of cases. So I want to find the topic, or more likely topics, of interest here. So just scrolling through, I kind of have to look across, which again is, I don't love that particular feature, but I can at least scroll. So here's a topic on ERISA preemption. What this search box will do is search these descriptions. It will not search the full text of the cases themselves. So when you're choosing your terms, be aware that it's a very broad search of just these very basic descriptions. So preemption might be a good search. A very denial of coverage, maybe, maybe not. So what we see here are very brief descriptions of cases decided interpreting Section 1144 and of the topic that we chose, ERISA preemption. So again, for my money, and believe me, these annotated codes, at least in print, cost a ton of money, it has earned its keep just from the notes of decisions. Because why do I need to do case research, extra case research, when I can at least get a great start here? Now, I may need to want to do my own later, but I'm definitely going to hone that research starting with the notes of decisions. Let's take a quick look, or a look, at what it looks like in print, because it does the same thing, same function, same great feature, but what you'll see on page 28, it just looks sort of different. And the sort of different mostly are these numbers that are attached to the topics, which actually we saw in that list rather than a hierarchical view. In the old days, when you couldn't click back and forth, you had to figure out, okay, so I'm interested in what topic here? So you'd look at page 28 and 29 and you'd flip through the book. I'll pass this around if you're interested. So what I would do is I would just scan down the topics, which actually is what I would do online also, and see which of these topics would be possibly interesting to me. So I see, ooh, health maintenance organization, page 29 I'm looking at now. Health maintenance organizations, number 192. I'm going to remember, 192. I continue scanning. Ooh, negligence, tort, state regulation, or control, number 238. Remember 238. We could list this long. There are probably a bunch of other numbers I would jot down to remember as well. And then once I got past the list of topics, I would actually get into the notes of decisions themselves, which are organized, surprise by that note number. So I knew I was interested in 192, so I would flip past 1 and 2 and 5 and 7 and 9 and get to 192. And you see on page 31, There's 192, health maintenance organizations, and I would read those notes of decisions that were of cases decided regarding interpreting 1144 having to do with health maintenance organization. And again, on page 32, you would see the continuation of that, of note 192. And if I were interested in 238, I would just keep on flipping till the numbers say 238. Okay. So those are the highlights of the annotated code, the context and analysis and the notes of decision. We'll take a look at key citing and shepherdizing next time. So what I will show you now is a quick, this looks like on Lexis and Bloomberg. So again, I'm going to put in, and notice I'm putting in USCA. That's a mistake, right? Because USCS. However, Lexis kind of knows that there are people like me who are typing faster than they think. So Lexis recognizes USCA. And I'm pretty sure Westlaw would recognize USCS. I usually don't make that mistake, so I haven't tested it. But and so here you see we get to 1144. Table of contents looks a little, the whole screen looks a little different, but the functionality is pretty much the same. So you can get to the table of contents here, or you can back your way up to the entire Title 29, which I don't think would be particularly useful, or the table of contents like we saw in print, Chapter 18. And what you would want to know to do on Lexis, which may or may not be obvious, is you need to scroll down to your title, our title, 29, and then scroll down to where we just clicked, Chapter 18, and here's where you see the table of contents. And then you can expand it with these arrows. You can also expand it out here as well. Again, looks somewhat different on Lexis. To see the, whoops, I got ahead of ourselves, to see those credits where we looked at all the public laws, you want to go to the end of this section. Lexis calls it history. Again, Westlaw calls it credits. The print doesn't call it much of anything. It's just in a tiny parenthetical at the end, and you see the same information here. You have this jump to, which actually would be an easier way, honestly, to get to the history. We could also get to research references, the equivalent of context and analysis. So you see Amger, you see some treatises. Again, it looks a lot different than Westlaw, but the functionality is there. Other features. We see forms, and of course, my favorite, case notes, otherwise known as notes of decision on Westlaw. And we see those topics. The topics are going to be called different things because, again, these are competitors. But again, I can scroll down and see what might look interesting. Consistent, ERISA state laws that might be of interest. And then when I do find one of interest, ooh, malpractice. I'll click on the arrow and it brings me down to number 77, and here are the cases. And as was true on Westlaw as well, I can click on the cases and read them directly if I so choose. So again, annotated code works on Lexis. Doesn't look the same, but it works similarly as on Westlaw. And last but not least, Bloomberg, as I mentioned, not quite as robust. And I will tell you rather than show you because the computer is just too slow. You don't want to put in USCA or USCS. It won't recognize it. Or at least it didn't the last time I tried. And you do need to tell Bloomberg this is a citation search, which is kind of straightforward. And so it pulls up again. And what Bloomberg does have, although as we discovered our term search does not search it, is Bloomberg is now adding case analysis because they know they're librarians like me who go on and wax poetic about how great notes of decisions and case notes are, so they figure that they have to do it as well. And you have to figure it's not just me waxing poetic if Bloomberg is adding it. So Bloomberg does have that feature, which again I think is what makes annotated codes great. It doesn't have some of the other good features of annotated codes. So again, they get lower marks from me anyway when it comes to doing statutory research. Okay, so that's annotated codes on Westlaw, Lexis, and Bloomberg. We're done, right? You can feel it, no, but you're not quite sure why. I can sense it. Update, update, and update, even online. Now, of course, in the print, going back to our handout, you want to check the pocket part. Now, notice the pocket part on page 33 is only up to date through the end of 2013. It says through the first session, so that, which isn't very good. Actually, it's not much better than the U.S. Code. I was actually somewhat surprised to learn. But what an annotated code does is it sends us the annual pocket parts, and then it sends us, being the library, these interim pamphlets. Now, the thing about these interim pamphlets, which is actually kind of scary, is that most people don't know to check them. But they're actually really important, because as we've already decided, whatever Congress did in 2013, it did something. And we need to know about that. And we wouldn't have known about that checking the pocket part if we were constricting ourselves to print. We would need to know to check this interim pamphlet that lives beyond, at the end of the set of USCA. However, we don't have to spend too much time on that because most people are going to be doing their research online these days. And as I suspect, fewer and fewer of you will be encountering the print. But if you do, remember the interim pamphlets. But on Westlaw, and then I'll show you again on Lexis and Bloomberg, you still do need to update, update, and update. It's a whole lot simpler. But what you want to do is you want to be aware of these flags. So unconstitutional or preempted prior version. So you want to take a look at this case. And proposed legislation is not law yet, but it's still worth looking at to see how far along it is, to see, is this something I need to watch out for if this is an area of law I practice in all the time and maybe it's going to change. The other thing you want to just double check on is the currentness. And on Westlaw, you have the currentness right here. And all that does is pop you to the bottom below our credits. And we see here, I know it says notes of decisions there, but just below here it says current through Public Law 113-290. And then excluding these, approved 12/19/2014. So now we know, okay, Westlaw has incorporated pretty much any changes through the end of December. And as we've already seen, we looked at any laws that were passed in 2015, and there was that one that didn't have anything to do with ERISA or healthcare law. And not that you'd have to go and check that. What Westlaw would most likely do is put a flag up here saying, you better check this. We haven't incorporated, they won't say this, but what it means, that they will have a red flag up here. What that looks like on Lexis, should you be researching on Lexis, you don't even have to click on anything. It just tells you right up here, current through Public Law 113-286, approved 12/18. And, well, we don't have the section on, or did I pull that up? Oh, I did pull it up. Okay, so let's go back to document on Bloomberg. And here it is right here, current through. So you just want to look and make sure that these wonderful online systems that are not warning us, hey, something's changing, be aware. So you still do want to update, update, and update, but it's not quite so involved as checking pocket parts and softbound supplements and all of that. Okay, any questions? So what I've done is put together, somewhere in my piles here, a workshop. We don't have a whole lot of time, so get through what you can. And then bring whatever we don't finish, and we'll find time either in the next class or the following one to finish. As happened with our secondary sources unit, I kind of keep things fluid depending on how everything goes, but I do leave time at the end, so we will have time to finish. And I will please ask questions. I will wander around. I see one already. Excellent.
Logging into the wireless.
Oh, that's
I'm having an issue with that, so.
work in teams if you like. So.
I'm trying to connect all the class, but I can't get it.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I mean, we can spend time trying to work it out, but I think honestly, the purposes of class, which is what I'm interested in, why don't you work together with somebody and then, because you may need, I'm not sure I can solve your problem, and then you'll need to talk to IT anyway.
Okay.
Who are across the hall and may still be there after class if you want to take care of it then. Do you normally, have you had trouble in the past?
No, just checking.
Just here or elsewhere?
This is the class I ever used my laptop for. So.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. I'll tell you what.